April the 6th, 2022. Yes, well, today we want to take a look at a few issues. I think one issue that has kind of come up quite a bit here that has some note is the purchase of 9.2% of the Twitter shares by Elon Musk. And that's got a lot of play in both financial and political circles lately, and it's an interesting development. I know that certain conservatives have been very encouraged in saying things like, well, he'll move to put Trump back on Twitter and things of that sort, which may or may not happen. Actually, he has been invited to join the board of directors. So I understand there's 12 people on the board. He is one of the 12. He probably is the largest shareholder of any of those individuals. And so it looks like a very positive development. However, we have to understand that you can't really consider Elon Musk as exactly a conservative either. And so, I mean, we could go into, I remember his background primarily was in the area of, electric cars and solar power, and seemed to be very, very uh, compatible with the Green New Deal movement, if you want to call it that, for many years. However, he has other interests such as space exploration and now Twitter. Um, he's a very creative individual, no doubt a bit of a free thinker. I mean, and he certainly is looking forward to the idea of colonizing Mars, for example. So this is a whole different kind of personality than your political hack type Democrat. In fact, what his politics are, I don't know exactly. But at any rate, I get, but I think what we can say is that in recent years, I think he's run into more and more obstacles with the liberal left on some of his projects, and this may have something to do with him finally getting active in this area. And by the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like because it helps out with the algorithm. Subscribe if you haven't, and any comments are appreciated, and you can ring that bell for notifications. Okay, so what I'm getting at is we don't know exactly where he's going with this. It's not like he's just become CEO of Twitter either. However, another thing is that previous to this, there was another fund led by Paul Singer, who achieved some notoriety via Tucker Carlson about the takeover of Cabela's and the effect it had on a town where the Cabela's was headquartered and all that. And some but Singer was apparently is a Republican contributor. So I don't think he's necessarily again a Trumpite by any means. But on the other hand, he's not necessarily for all the censorship, I don't suppose either. I suspect that many of the major investors in here are either people in it just for financial reasons, or and are not very politically active. I'm sure that like Jack Dorsey and some of these other people are politically active, and obviously they did allow this thing to be turned over to the current manager, who's very left wing, obviously. So again, it's hard to know what's going to happen. Right now, as I understand it, as Elon has agreed that in return for being on there, that for 90 days he won't increase his share of the company. I mean, in principle, I guess he could buy a total 51% controlling interest and simply take it over. But so far, he's signed an agreement where he won't make those won't go above 14 point, I think it's 9% in the next 90 days. So whatever's going to happen is probably going to take some time, but he will obviously be an outsized influence on the direction. And what we know is he probably wants to make this more of a free speech type platform rather than the currently biased platform that is now. I mean, that may not indicate that he wants you to be able to get by with anything you want to do on it necessarily, but at least he may want rules that are not based on the political content of what you're saying as much as, just that isn't anything illegal or, that sort of thing. So at any rate, I think it's a positive development. I wouldn't get quite overly enthusiastic as some people have, but it is a movement in the right direction. And like I said, this Paul Singer, I believe, has a major share in this thing too, I believe. Not him personally, but in this case, I think it's a hedge fund he controls. But remember, these funds do vote their proxies and have a lot to do with who's the the chairman and chief executive officer. So this may this may portend good things in the future, but I don't think it's going to happen immediately. But it might also have a chilling effect on the censors, in the sense that if Elon objects to anybody being banned, that might put the inhibit on them actually doing it. Well, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But I think it is a positive development. But I think there are other players involved too. And certainly, I think the most useful idea possible. I mean, as I point out at the end of all these videos, I post my links on these other sites, and I do post on them from time to time as well. But I seem to get more interaction. I think I get more feedback from the video posts, I believe, from Gab probably than anything else. But I have more actually interaction with individuals, probably more on Twitter, although I'm getting some from Gab as well. Almost nothing from Parler anymore, which was very strong before the election of 2020. But now it's kind of, to me, it's almost like I don't know. You don't know what site people are getting your videos links from, so it's hard to know. I don't think I get a whole lot from Facebook, other than maybe one or two individuals there that know me personally. So from back when I was in school and that kind of thing. We're talking like grade school and high school. So anyhow, but so that's kind of the way that goes. The other development here, which I think is interesting, is the Biden's decision to apparently revoke the Title 42 and allow all these single male illegal immigrants into the country, in addition to the families, which I never understood why we're letting families in, but okay, whatever. And it was being restricted based on the COVID thing. What's interesting about this is this has been maintained for some time. And although I guess at some point you could have liberal activist groups file a suit against the Title 42, I know that we now have 3 states filing a lawsuit to try to maintain it, and those would be Arizona, Louisiana, and Missouri. And what's notable about that is each of those are in 3 separate federal district courts of appeals, because no matter how it turns out at the local level, there'll be an appeal to higher courts. And by going in 3 distinct courts of appeals, of which there's likely to be perhaps a difference between the decisions of those courts of appeals, it gives it a more rapid elevation to the Supreme Court. So that's something that's going on with that as well. But to me, politically, this seems to make a real mistake on their part. I mean, after all, it's an election year, and surging the level of illegal immigrants, which is already at a very high level, to an even higher level right before the election, seems to me to be quite counterproductive to the Democrats' policy. It's kind of amazing they wouldn't want to wait on this until, let's say, after the election or something, so that so that all the bad would happen later. But they're apparently going to do it right before the election, so we'll see the impact of it. And to me, that seems to me to be a blunder on their part. But on the other hand, I guess if it's got to happen, it's probably good that they will blunder. So and so that's what it is. And we'll keep an eye on that. I don't know what sort of reactions will occur. Whether or not the courts will actually order it being maintained is hard to know, as in fact the pandemic has kind of, at least in the U.S., has drifted down to a lower level, although there is outbreaks of this so-called BA2 variant of Omicron that's pretty prevalent in China and also in Asia and in Europe, which is kind of interesting that the countries that were early on being given a lot of acclaim for how good they were at controlling it when we were supposed to be so bad, now they seem to be more out of control, and we seem to be going down to very marginal levels at the moment. So it looks like this virus is just coming for everybody, and you can't dodge it ultimately. You can only put it off. Well, anyway, so that's kind of on that. I guess I will make a comment here. My last video was almost entirely focused on the Ukraine war and Russia invasion. And of course, in the last couple of days, we've had the revelation of atrocities committed by Russian forces in Bucha, I think it's the name of it, which is a suburb of Kyiv. And I'm sure that similar events have happened otherwise. I mean, who knows what's going on in Mariupol, for instance. But that hasn't been revealed yet, since it's still under Russian attack and occupation and battling. However, this is not atypical of a Russian operation, is it? I mean, I'm kind of still wondering, was this massacre done as a deliberate act of policy, or was it really just a military unit that was completely frustrated with the massive resistance they're receiving from all quarters, both military and civilian Ukraine, and they just lashed out? I don't know. Well, I mean, it's unclear. I mean, politically, it seems to be a really ignorant thing to do until, even if you look at it from the point of view of a dictator, when the actual outcome of the conflict is still in play, and when it can become a major political propaganda advantage to the Ukrainians. The Russians shouldn't seem to want to motivate the NATO countries to take even more sanctions and even more military aid, but they seem to be almost completely callous about this. The other thought occurs to me, this may be done by these mercenary groups that I've mentioned in a previous video. There's this so-called Wagner group, how you want to pronounce it, which is a fairly large mercenary group that's employed by the Russians. Very vicious, as I understand it. And then they're bringing in these fighters from Syria, which I'm sure these people are well skilled at doing massacres and things of this sort. So, at any rate, it's another tragedy of this war, which again, I think should have been prevented, but everybody decided that to ignore what the bear was doing until it was too late, I think, or not to take it seriously. But you know, it doesn't justify anything here. This is a war crime, but again, well, hey, you know, to be honest about it, you know, we had our My Lai massacre too. This is bigger than that, I'm sure. Not if you look at the whole Ukrainian situation, it's much bigger, and it's obviously more calculated by it. The My Lai massacre was a case of frustrated troops acting out in a state of rage, more or less. And of course, the other countries have had these things happen too, that were the surrogate forces Israel had in the Lebanon war engaged in a similar operation. Again, I don't believe this was planned or authorized in that case by the Israelis at all, but you know, you have passionate people. They were trying to use these phalangists to you know, clear a village rather than sending their own infantry in and taking high casualties. Well, the phalangists had a different idea of how to clear a village, let's put it that way. So these things happen in war, so that's one way of looking at it. But at the same time, if this is a Russian policy, I don't think that Russia tends to genocide the Ukrainian people, but they probably do intend to intimidate them. And at this point, the Russians are on the retreat. The units that came down that road, that big convoy, those units apparently have already retreated back into Belarus and are regrouping to redeploy to the eastern Ukraine. And the group that was coming down from the Russian side has backed off mostly. I think there's some of them are still, according to the maps I see, still in Ukraine, but they're well away from Kyiv. And so the threat to Kyiv has pretty much been relieved now. And of course, the question now is, to what degree do they redeploy to the east? And apparently that's where the next Russian offensive will be. So we'll have to keep up with what's happening there too, and what we decide to do also. At any rate, I want to wrap this up for now. And like I say, the addresses of my accounts on the various social media are listed in the description below. And I do post these on Parler now as well, to kind of a backup channel. And we'll wrap this up for now. And until next time.